The next question reads, Laurel, how worried are you that vaccines will be banned if RFK Jr. is put in charge of the Department of Health and Human Services?
Oh boy, I have been waiting for this question.
Today's the day.
Today's the day. Okay, let's start by acknowledging that everything right now is speculation. RFK Jr. still has to be confirmed. And even if he is confirmed, we don't know what may happen. But I can talk about this from a historical perspective. I am actually not as concerned that vaccines would be banned outright. RFK Jr. has made some comments about allowing people who want vaccines to get them. What I think is more likely is that liability protections for vaccine manufacturers could be removed, and as a result, we would stop having access to vaccines. And I think that you should allow me to explain this more in our Sick of the Week. Sick of the Week! All right, so you may have heard the comments or the claims that you cannot sue vaccine manufacturers, that they have zero liability for anything that their vaccines do. And you might have even heard that manufacturers have this protection because vaccines are so dangerous that they are, quote unquote, unavoidably unsafe. And I want to start out by saying very clearly that this is untrue. It is false. It is wrong. Vaccine manufacturers can absolutely be sued. But to explain vaccine liability, we first have to go back for a second to the 1980s. In the 1970s and 80s, there were increasing lawsuits tied to the DPT vaccine. It's the diphtheria, pertussis, and tetanus vaccine. The DPT vaccine we used to use included inactivated whole cell pertussis virus, which can cause some pretty unfun reactions after administration that were scary, but they were not long-term. Because these injection reactions were so visible in infants, people began to tie other medical events that also happened in the time frame after vaccination to the DPT vaccine, and lawsuits started to happen for manufacturers. Despite the fact that the evidence would accumulate that DPT vaccine was not responsible for the serious life-altering medical conditions that it was being tied to, or it was claimed that people were claiming it was causing, the lawsuits were so plentiful and so costly, combined with a drop in vaccine demand, that many manufacturers just stopped making the vaccine. And in 1984, we were left with a single vaccine producer trying to cover this routine immunization for infants. Realizing that losing vaccine access could cost us lives if previously preventable diseases were to return, Congress passed the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986. This act is the reason that we have things like vaccine information sheets and the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System, which is also known as VAERS. In 1988, HHS, the Department of Health and Human Services, created the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, or VICP. This program established an additional tax that vaccine manufacturers must pay for each dose of a vaccine that is on the CDC's list of recommended childhood vaccines. So the flu vaccine is taxed at 75 cents a dose, and the MMR vaccine is taxed at $2.25 a dose because it covers 3 diseases, measles, mumps, and rubella. These funds are then used to compensate the rare but serious vaccine injuries based on a scale of known potential adverse outcomes. And the system is set up in a way that people don't have to prove that their injury was caused by the vaccine, something that you would have to prove in a civil lawsuit, in order to be compensated. If a claim is filed with the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program and it takes more than 240 days to receive a response, if someone rejects the compensation that is made to them, or if the program rejects someone's claim, they can then sue the manufacturers in civil court. They have to file with VICP first. Now, is the program perfect? No. Just like a lot of organizations, it suffers from a lack of staffing. There's a backlog of claims to get through, and there are compensation caps that could probably stand to be increased to meet, today's costs. The point of all of this is to deter frivolous lawsuits. If everyone who believed any adverse event that happened at any period after you have received a vaccine could file a lawsuit, the time, money, and energy that would need to be spent addressing those suits could result in a burden that makes manufacturers decide it's no longer worthwhile to produce vaccines. And then vaccines aren't banned, but they're no longer available. It's worth noting, too, that manufacturers are not protected from lawsuits for defects, negligence, or fraud. If companies knew their vaccines were extremely dangerous or harmful, if they were contaminated due to negligent safety during production, if they made fraudulent claims about their efficacy, they could all be sued for that. My issue with the claim that drug makers can't be sued for vaccine injuries is twofold. One, it's not true. The other issue is that by claiming that there is nothing you can do if someone is vaccine injured, you run the risk of preventing people who have genuine vaccine injuries from seeking compensation because they probably don't know that programs like VICP or the Countermeasure Injury Compensation Program, which is the program that provides coverage for COVID vaccine injuries, even exist. So I am less worried about vaccines being banned than I am worried about removing these liability steps from drug makers, which would mean the cost of producing vaccines is too great and then they just stop doing it altogether. So the sick of the week this week is going to go to doing background reading instead of just claiming things.